Rhythm Roulette might be the greatest beatmaking series of all time on YouTube. It's shown us some of the best producers in the world flipping random records and making insane beats, while others, let's be honest, completely fumbled. So today I'm gonna do the most internet thing ever and judge people who are far more accomplished than me. Let's rank the 30 most iconic Rhythm Roulette episodes from absolute masterclasses to total wastes of time. Who had the best Rhythm Roulette ever? Who surprised me? Who straight up flopped? Let's find out. And if you're a sample-based producer yourself, a quick note, I'm actually hosting a sampling contest right now where you could win up to $1,000. The link for more information is in the description box below. Anyways, let's start. The first one up is Ninth Wonder. He has the biggest, most popular Rhythm Roulette. He's a producer who actually watched at least one of my videos in the past, which is cool. So I'm gonna start by putting him at solid work. In his episode, I just love seeing how enthusiastic he is and how much fun he's having making his beats. In terms of producing, some things that jumped out to me is that he builds the ideas in his head first, which is really interesting. I don't think I have the imagination to do that myself. And he also often lays down the drums before the samples, which is the opposite of what I do. So overall, it's just cool to see a different beat making process in this episode. He also makes a bunch of beats, not just one, but at one point he even calls one of the beats Just Alright.
That was alright. Let's go to the next one.
Which is nice to see that he's not sort of overstating or acting like everything that he touches is magic. We see some humility here, which is really nice overall. So I'm really happy to see that he is a crowd favorite. I know a lot of people would probably put him as the sample lord, but there's only one sample lord that I'm allowing, and I already have that person in mind, so you'll have to wait and see who that is. Next up though, we have Havoc, and I am also going to put him in solid work just under Ninth Wonder. In this episode, what jumped out to me was it was really cool seeing him make a beat out of residual instrument noise. That was a really unique thing that jumped out to me. And later on, we see another cool technique where he's stacking multiple chops on top of each other and playing two chops at the same time. And what this does is it basically creates a much richer layering. It's almost like building a chord using multiple chops at the same time. And in this episode, we also see the famous Havoc snare. So those who are unfamiliar, if you look at the credits to Kanye West's Real Friends, you'll see Havoc is attributed as a producer on that song. And I believe the reason why is because Kanye used this very snare that we see Havoc use here. Even for my real friends. Overall, just a great beat. I am a huge Mobb Deep fan. They're probably my top 3 of all time, so I might be biased here, but I am putting Havoc at solid work. Next up, we have Static Selecta. He will be in the That Was Decent category. Overall, I felt the beat that he made was cool. It was decent. I really liked the string sample that he found earlier on in this video. I feel like that would have been more of a challenge and would have resulted in a bit more of a unique beat. But instead, he opted for more of a straightforward sample, a soul sample, and that resulted in a little bit more of a straightforward, soulful beat. He even calls the beat simple himself in the video. Overall, I just didn't really feel like I saw anything new or insightful, just a pretty standard process, and in the end, a pretty decent beat. Ill Mind is next. Him I will put at That Was Decent as well, just above Static Selecta though. Ill Mind makes a pretty okay beat. I really like the drum work, but the sample choice was just not my favorite. It was more of a clavinet sound that he used, which is just not a pleasing sound to me. The chopping was a bit more intricate, and that's why I put him above Static Selecta. And he actually says something that was really interesting in this video.
I usually like getting real musical with my stuff, but this is just one of those tracks that, you know, you don't really need to go crazy.
You can hear with the way the sample is used and the chops that he created, the clavinet in the sample is just really musical. It's really fast moving. And so overall, whenever you have a very fast moving, very musical piece or sound within your sample, that puts less sort of need for you to introduce that yourself in the beat. That's just a framework that I like to use. So yeah, Ill Mind, decent work here. Next up, we have LP. I am actually going to put LP at the very top of solid work. Overall, just a great episode. It was funny seeing him use a warped record, and he was just overall really fun and entertaining to watch. I really liked seeing his unique approach, this almost Bomb Squadian one-shot approach to sampling for the one idea that he starts building. Then later he finds what he likes and he does this really unique repitching approach, which is just far different and a little bit more advanced than what you typically see. And then he takes this idea and he uses his own amazing layers and just builds a very LP-esque type of beat. Just overall, I was really impressed with him and I thought this episode was just fantastic. I really loved it. Black Milk is up next. He had some of the worst luck with the records that he pulled. He had like a Christmas record at one point, and another one of the vinyls that he pulled was just really scratched up and almost destroyed. But he did a great job of just finding something usable, which was really impressive. And he also took it a step further where he created multiple loops, multiple versions of a beat, instead of just finding one loop and then just calling it a day. So he put in a little bit more effort compared to some of the other producers that you see in the series. And also learned a really valuable trick that he brings up of just adding random vocals into the beat from rappers to make the beat sound better. So that was a really cool technique that I always kept in the back of my mind. So for Black Milk, I'm putting him at the bottom of solid work for now. Here we have Manny Fresh, not a producer I think of when I think of sampling, but unfortunately I think I'm putting his episode at a waste of time. The sample that he uses is pretty bad to me. I just do not like this country sounding loop. Maybe it's because I'm from Canada and that energy just doesn't exist in me. I just could not connect to this idea at all. And then after that, he kind of just adds what feels like random sounds on top. They don't really add much onto the beat. It just feels random and chaotic. At that point, he then makes a second beat, but it kind of has the exact same problems as the first beat to me. Overall, as a viewer, I just didn't really feel like I got much out of this, unfortunately. And that is why I'm putting this at a waste of time. I have a tremendous amount of respect for Manny Fresh. I just don't think I view him as a sample-based producer, but he's made incredible beats without using samples in the past. So, yeah. Eric Sermon, he is up next. Some of the greatest bass lines to ever exist in hip hop. He is responsible for many of them. His approach in this video is also really unique of finding smaller pieces and then repitching them to create shorter layers. And his ability to layer his own musical ideas onto the samples is also really impressive in this video. I think the idea that he builds though just doesn't really quite come together. I know whenever I do this approach of using multiple samples and trying to stack smaller pieces on top of each other, even having one small layer or one small sound not sit right can completely throw off the entire beat. So big respect to Eric Sermon for how complex this approach is. But for this beat here, I am giving it a bit of a low ranking. I'm putting it at a bit of a letdown. Not a waste of time or anything. Still cool to see his process. And I feel like I got something out of it, but the beat just didn't quite come together for me. Apollo Brown. I remember when I found out that he uses Cool Edit to make beats, I was just really confused. So for those that don't know, Cool Edit isn't even a beat making program. It's more of an audio editing program like Audacity. So what he does is he copy and paste layers on top of each other. Just a really unique and impressive way to make beats, but not something I would really recommend as something people learn to do themselves. In the end, the beat that he makes is okay. Apollo himself says he's not all that thrilled by it, but I thought it was pretty good. And so while the beat is cool, I would say not much in terms of production techniques that I would want to use personally. So I'm putting Apollo Brown at the top of That Was Decent. Here we have Mac Miller. So this one kind of threw me off a bit. So the first time I heard of Mac Miller, it was around the time he put out that project, Blue Side Park. And from what I remember, it was critically and somewhat universally panned. Not very many people liked it. And when I first heard the music on it, I kind of just thought it was not all that great. And so I wrote Mac Miller off for a very long time. And then all of a sudden I see him having an episode of Rhythm Roulette, and I went in with somewhat of a lowered opinion of him, but I would say that I was really impressed with what he did. The way that he uses a seemingly insignificant percussive sound and builds his beat around that is really impressive. You see him use big, colorful drums after creating that layer, which is really smart. It's just a really great way to quickly fill up space in your beat if you're using a very minimal layer or core idea in your beat. His use of multi-layering was also impressive. He plays his own sounds and ideas on top, and everything sounds really well integrated. The beat that he makes feels really unique to him. And so overall, my respect for Mac Miller just really skyrocketed after seeing this video. And so I'm gonna put him in solid work underneath Havoc, but above Black Milk. Next up, we have Oh No. For those people that don't know, Oh No is actually Madlib's younger brother. I am a big fan of Oh No. Some of his beat tapes from about a decade ago were some of the best ever. Dr. No's Ethiopium, Dr. No's Experiment. He is one of the most creative samplers. And in this video, you can see him right away doing something unique in that he samples video games. So already I found myself impressed with what he was doing. But unfortunately, the video games didn't really provide much material. You can see he tries layering, but in the end, the beat just doesn't really sound all that great. I think part of the reason why is because I would assume that audio from a video game would probably be highly compressed. And if you've ever tried to make a beat out of something that is just overly compressed and really squashed, it is a nightmare to get anything to sound good or fit together. And the beat that he makes ends up feeling a bit chaotic. He has some great music in the past using really obscure, unique samples, but this one here just didn't really work out for me. And so while I do have a tremendous amount of respect for Oh No and I love his music, I was a bit let down by this episode. High Tech is up next. I am going to put at the top of That Was Decent. Come on, move. There we go. I like how he makes his beat here. He at one point decides to start over and scrap it because he didn't like the original idea, which is something that I do often as well. Once he finds an idea that he does like, he does a pretty good job of layering his own sounds on top. Overall, just a pretty decent beat here. I do feel as though the techniques that he used, I didn't really feel like I got much out of it, although the end beat is pretty impressive. And so that is why I'm just gonna keep it at the top of That Was Decent, maybe even the bottom of solid work, but I'll keep him here for now. Here we have John Wayne, a fellow YouTuber, his hair looking just as luscious as it does today. For John Wayne, I'm going to put him in the middle of That Was Decent. The beat that he makes in the end is pretty cool. For the most part, some pretty straightforward sampling techniques, a bit of chopping and looping, cool drum work on the beat as well. But I would say that I enjoy his beats that he makes on his YouTube channel far more. I think he really makes some incredible stuff on YouTube. And so for the beat that he makes in this episode, I just thought it was okay, but I would highly recommend checking his actual YouTube videos out because you can see him make some really incredible stuff. Large Professor is next. Him, I am going to put in a similar place as High Tech. The Top of that was decent, maybe even solid work, but I'll put him here for now. I thought it was really interesting to see how he creates a drum loop and sets the BPM for his beat before everything else, and then he adjusts the sample to play at that BPM while the drums are playing. This is a really useful idea that can help you catch an idea within your sample that you might have otherwise missed. And then he finds pieces within the sample that fits what he's built, and it sounds great. The chops all fit with one another, and you can even see him going into detail using all 3 samples and layering them perfectly. And so with that in mind, with how much unique techniques you see him do and how much I enjoyed the end result, I'm actually gonna move him up to the bottom of solid work. Organized noise, again, producers that I don't really think about when I think about sampling. And I would say that this episode was also a bit of a letdown. The idea that they came up with, it was just not really particularly interesting in terms of the texture that the sample provides in the beat. And in the end, the sample wasn't really central in the beat anyways. I would have honestly liked to watch them make a beat without samples, just because I probably feel like they could have shown a lot more and not be as hamstrung by the sample. Honestly, nothing but respect for Organized Noise. They are some of the most forward-thinking producers with what they did with Outkast. Absolutely incredible. Again, I just don't think that this challenge probably aligned with their own strengths as producers, and so that is why I'm putting them at a bit of a letdown. Big Crit, here I am gonna put him at solid work. I would put him just below Mac Miller, I would say. So in this video, he starts off with a pretty straightforward sounding loop, which does sound good, and I think many producers would have stopped here. But then he decides to layer in these vocals from a separate sample. And at first it sounds pretty rough, but then he's able to really integrate it well into his beat. And then after that, he does this again with a piano from yet another separate sample. Just a lot of impressive multi-sampling and layering, which is really hard to do. And in the end result, it's a pretty great beat. So great job to Big Crit, solid work here. DJ Dahi. Out of all the rhythm roulettes, this one blew my mind the most. I've said this many times before. I think DJ Dahi is the most inventive producer of this generation. So here he starts by choosing a sample that isn't doing all the heavy lifting. And he uses the sample and does some nice manipulation to it by slowing it down, and then he chops it up. And then he starts programming the drums and structuring around the beat, and it's just so wild to me that the direction that he goes in. He builds this bass line, and once everything comes together, the beat just sounds so full. These ideas that he does are just so different than what everyone else does in this series. I just always find myself amazed when everyone would go this way. DJ Dahi just ends up going that way. I just have so much respect for how his mind works and where he goes with his beats. And that is why I am placing DJ Dahi as my sample lord. All hail DJ Dahi. Jake 1, I would put him somewhere around that was decent, possibly close to a bit of a letdown, to be honest. I like Jake 1. He catches a pretty good gospel loop within this video, which does sound good. But from there, while he does do some layering, it's more so just ear candy. They're not really musical ideas that he's building, and he doesn't really add to the beat in a substantial way beyond just that core loop. After that, we have some pretty straightforward drum pattern building and a good bass line. Overall, I just didn't really feel like I caught anything that jumped out to me. It's just a pretty good standard beat with a pretty standard process. And so that is why I'm going to keep this at that was decent. Wonder Girl is the next one up. I was surprised by this one. Another producer that I don't really think of when I think of sampling. I think that she chose a really weird and difficult idea to sample. And in this video, you can even see that there were moments where it just wasn't coming together for a really long time in the video. But once she programmed the bass line and the structure around the sample and used the sample as almost a smaller melodic layer rather than the main melodic driving idea in the beat, I felt like that is when the beat really came together. And with just how unique and bizarre the sample was and how she was able to finally connect everything together, I am going to give this one a solid performance. I really liked the beat and all the detail that was put into it, and so that was really impressive work by Wonder Girl. You're not having deja vu, that is Ninth Wonder again, so he recently dropped a second episode, and in this episode he makes far more beats, almost like double the amount that he did in the first one. And this is where I am going to bring up the Great British Baking Theory. For those that don't know, the Great British Baking Show is a show where a bunch of bakers come together and they are put through routine challenges where they have to bake a bunch of different stuff. So for example, they have to bake cupcakes one week, souffles the next week, whatever. And every once in a while, what happens is that the contestants are given a challenge. They'll be told to make a cake of some sort. And one of the contestants will have the idea of making 5 different cakes, for example. And what ends up happening is, even if one of those cakes is incredible, if one of them is just sort of mediocre and sort of just decent, it really brings down the overall perception of their performance. And that's kind of what I feel like happened with this video. While Ninth Wonder definitely does make a lot of cool beats in this video, I feel like the amount of beats that kind of were just okay to me brought this one down. And so that is why I'm going to put this particular episode at that was decent, I would say around here. Arab Music, he is someone that I have a little bit of a side story here. When he first started blowing up was around the time when I first started making beats, and I found myself very envious and jealous of him. He was making videos that were going viral. He got to hang out with my favorite producer of all time, Alchemist. His name's Arab Music. I kind of look like an Arab musician, and so seeing what he was doing and what I was unable to do just felt very jealous and resentful towards him. But after watching this video, I will say that I think what he was able to do was really impressive and solid. I would put him in the middle of solid work. At first, we see some straightforward chopping and sampling in his episode, but I think what's interesting is just how much a beat can be improved by just adding these kinds of small fills and variations at the end of the loop, and also dropping drums every once in a while. Just a great lesson that you see within this episode. We also see him do more than just a simple loop. He creates a B version of this idea. So again, more effort than what other producers might show within their Rhythm Roulette episodes. He even adds his own sounds into the beat afterwards. Just overall, a really solid work here and a great hard beat by the end. And that is why I cannot deny Arab Music and put him in solid work. David Banner, again, not a producer who I associate sampling with. I was excited briefly when he found this one more dark sample in his video, but he decides not to use it, and eventually he goes with a more traditional, straightforward soul loop. It wasn't anything that I was excited by. Again, maybe it's because I'm Canadian and there's just snow everywhere here and we are soulless beings. But while he does do a great job of laying around the sample, I didn't really find the sampling part of this video and of the beat all that great. And so to me, I put this as a bit of a letdown, unfortunately. Here we have DJ Jazzy Jeff, yet another very popular episode. I didn't even know Jazzy Jeff produced, to be honest. I thought he was just a DJ. I didn't really see anything that jumped out to me in this video as an interesting sampling approach. It's just kind of straightforward what he does. But again, since I didn't even know he produces, I can't really say that I was let down. So I'm just gonna put this as that was decent. Not really something that I would watch again or recommend, but you know what? Maybe I will put it down here at a bit of a letdown in that case, just because I didn't really feel like there's much to this one. Hit Boy is next. I was really impressed by this one, so I'm going to put him at solid work. First off, the sample that he decides to flip is just really unique and different, being a rock guitar riff. So it's not like he made this easy on himself, and then from here he's able to build around this really impressively. Just a great beat overall, and then he's able to make yet another solid beat with a different sample. Nothing he made here felt very standard or typical or like a layup. It was just really solid work, and that's why he is in solid work. The next fella up is Joji, someone who I'm unfamiliar with, and from what I understand, he's like a meme lord of some sort. In this episode, he goes for a completely different genre, which I actually respect, someone doing something a little bit different than what everyone else is. But what he ends up making almost feels more like a novelty record more than anything, almost like it's a joke in a way. None of the sampling techniques that I see in here felt all that outstanding or helpful to me as a viewer or someone trying to learn sampling either. So I would put this at a waste of time as well, but it did look like he did do some work with the arrangement. It's not just like a simple crummy loop that he builds, so I'll just put this at the very bottom of letdown. Just Blaze, someone who I've always respected, but as I break more and more of his beats down on my YouTube channel, my appreciation and respect for him has grown even more. It was cool to see him in this episode think of the beat before he builds it. And he starts by building a pretty straightforward idea as the foundation to his beat. And if he just kept it at this, I probably would have been a bit let down. But after this, he adds more detail to really elevate the beat. He shows some really impressive musicianship. And so I would have put this somewhere closer to where High Tech is. I'm going to put this at the top of that was decent. If he just left this as that sort of foundational idea and called it a day, I probably would have been let down, but with how much detail he put into this, it really elevated it for me into a decent beat. Kenny Beats up next. Big amount of respect to Kenny Beats. I think what he did with the cave was similar to Rhythm Roulette, just really revolutionary and brings in the big audience and lets them see a side of producing that probably they would have never seen before. And I think that's really impressive and commendable that he took that risk and did it. In terms of this episode though, I would say that it was just decent. I would put it somewhere around here. While I thought his sample choice was cool and unique with that flute, where the beat ultimately went and how few sampling techniques were done just didn't really feel like it amazed me. I think many of the beats that he's made on the cave are far greater. This one here though, I would just say it was a bit below the standard that I think Kenny is able to do. London on the Track is next. Admittedly, this is someone who I'm just somewhat unfamiliar with, but I would say that this was a bit of a letdown as well. For how many views this had, I had a lot of expectations, but all he really did was use a simple loop and added some filtering to it. The final beat, it just didn't really sound all that full to me. While he did do some really cool layering, it didn't really show up in the beat. So you know what? I'm actually going to put him down at a waste of time. I just didn't really feel like the beat that he made or anything that he did in this video gave me anything. Robert Glasper and his son Riley up next. I thought this episode was absolutely incredible. How his son picked out a really unique guitar strumming idea. So it's really awesome to see that, you know, even his son isn't going for the easy layups. He's doing something that's a little bit more challenging.
Just that. That's it.
And it's such a great sample because of how empty and unmelodic it is. It would provide a lot of challenge, but it also gives a lot of opportunity to build something musical around it much more easily. And what they build around it is just absolutely incredible to me. The beat, the final beat that ends up being created is one of my favorites that I heard in this entire series. So this one is going to go near the very top of solid work. Absolutely great job here. And finally, we have Timbaland. So his episode caught a lot of negative attention for a good reason, I would say. The beat that he made in this video was really substandard, really unimpressive, and the amount of effort that was put into it was very low overall. Now, there are sort of two theories for why I believe this happened. One is something that I see a lot of people mention, which is that the only reason why he wanted to be on this episode in this series was to promote his company, his business, and half the episode was spent talking about it. And I can see validity to this theory. But another thought that I had was that the reason why his beat wasn't all that great is because over the years, Timbaland has been the victim of a lot of sample lawsuits, and over time, he's moved away from sampling. And when you watch his live streams nowadays, he actually uses pre-made modern samples. And the thing about these is that they provide layups fundamentally. Often you just see him adding drums to the sample and he's like, all right, this is done. And I think over time, your sampling skills can atrophy and get weakened because you're not really challenging yourself, which is why I built RSO real samples only. These are samples that are meant to provide that more traditional sampling experience. You're going to feel challenged, but it's going to also give you material to make amazing beats out of. And so I just overall believe that the reason why Timbaland's episode was so underwhelming and an absolute letdown, and I would also even just say a waste of time, is just because I just don't think that he's sampling enough, and that skill is probably diminished over time. Overall, though, I will say much respect to all these producers. It is extremely difficult to be given random samples and make a beat out of it, let alone having an entire crew filming you and having to be entertaining and fun. But that is where I would rank all of the top 30 Rhythm Roulette episodes. Let me know in the comments how big of an idiot I am. Again, this is the internet. We'll do internet things. And other than that, though, check out realsamplesonly.com. Again, I am hosting a contest where you can win $1,000 worth of prizes. So if you're a sample-based producer, you're going to want to check this out. And otherwise, I will see you next time. Bye for now.